There we go.
Okay. Just wait 1 second. There we go. Okay, so welcome to Teachers Teaching Teachers. It is May 18th, 2016. Oh, and somebody has the broadcast on. You don't want to play the broadcast at the same time? So it could be me. Let me see if it's me. It is me. It's hilarious. Okay, sorry.
Through the URL.
Yeah, I got it off. It was me. Sorry. Okay. Hi. Okay, so welcome to Teachers Teaching Teachers. As I said, it is May 18th, 2016, and we are here to talk with Steve Zemelman and three people who are in his book, recent book called From Inquiry to Change.
To action. To action.
To action. Change. Yeah, I may have made that mistake somewhere else.
Okay.
Anyway, so from inquiry to action. And Steve is going to do a lot of the talking here tonight, moderating. And he asked me if I wanted to ask questions, and I do, but I told him, well, I'll just interrupt. But Steve, why don't you first introduce this wonderful cast of characters who have graciously said they'd join us tonight. Thank you all.
Okay, and I have topics. I have a nice little topic list, but I'm hoping that everybody else will do most of the talk. So, I'm Steve Zemelman. I'm director of the Illinois Writing Project in Chicago, and I work on that and issues of restorative justice and action civics, which have become my passions the past few years. And so I've written this book, and I love to tell stories of teachers' classrooms and learn from them. And so you guys are seeing three of the people that I have just learned a tremendous amount from. Jill Bass, who now, Jill, I'm going to let you say your exact title. I'm just terrible at remembering titles. And Jill Bass is with the Mikvah Challenge, a nonprofit education organization here in Chicago that does tremendous work promoting student voice, student civic engagement, and projects in schools about that. So, Jill, you want to just say your title and something about yourself for a minute?
Sure. My title is so not important. I don't even care. It changes weekly, but more important is what I do, which is that we work with teachers to bring civic action into the classroom and into schools. So curriculum, professional development, and classroom support for teachers doing project-based learning, student-centered learning around civic action.
Okay. And Elizabeth Robbins has been a teacher of history in Chicago and is now, again, you'll tell us your exact title, but working at the central office of CPS, which I always think of as the belly of the beast, that these guys are making good things happen there, with the Civic Engagement Office at CPS. And Elizabeth, you want to say something else about that too?
Yeah, so I work in the Office of Social Science and Civic Engagement, and I am the Civic Instructional Specialist, so with the new Illinois state mandate that ensures that all students will graduate with at least a semester of civics, I help to support teachers around the district in implementing that.
And we have Brad Latimer, a math teacher at the Science Leadership Academy in Philadelphia. I've been fortunate to get connected with teachers around the country who are doing this kind of work, although there are many more that I haven't had a chance to meet or tell their stories. But Brad, when I found out he was doing this with math, I thought that was really cool. Brad, you want to say some more about what you're doing? Is Brad frozen?
Oh, Brad, are you there? Yep, we don't see you, Brad. Brad, you'll need to log off and log back in again, I think.
Yeah.
Google's playing games a little bit tonight.
The technology is not perfect with these things, so be it. Well, I thought it would be a good idea right at the start for somebody among us, and it definitely doesn't have to be me, to just define what we mean by action civics, and you know, who can do that, and how it's the same and or different from service learning. So I don't know, Elizabeth or Jill, you guys want to say something just about what it is so people know what we're talking about?
That sounds good. And could I just add that as you all introduce yourselves, there were different words for civic learning, civic, I mean, so kind of why so many different words, and maybe would be an interesting thing to think about.
Sure.
You're going to have some things to say about that.
I'll start, and I'm sure Liz will have stuff to add, and Brad as well. So the term action civics, it was sort of came about a few years ago as a way of designating a new kind of civics that, you know, is not your grandma's civics. It's action-based and puts students at the center. So rather than being passive recipients of understanding how government works, it's understanding their power as civic actors in a democracy. And for us, there's 4 main components to action civics, which are starting with youth expertise. So, you know, having the understanding that young people come to our classrooms and our spaces with experience and knowledge and expertise, and using that and leveraging that. Youth voice, which is activating the power of their voice and amplifying that and creating opportunities for them to share their voice. Learning by doing, which is just the classic experiential education, the idea that the best way to learn how to participate in a democracy is to actually participate in a democracy, not read about how other people do it. And then the last piece is reflection, and that happens throughout because as we probably all know, you get involved in things and you work to make things different or better, and you don't always win. And it takes time, and so being guided through that process by a teacher who can really stress the reflection piece so that every experience is meaningful and learning is a huge part of it. And we would say service learning is very well connected to action civics, but unfortunately some service learning tends to focus on like volunteerism and charity and addressing symptoms. And for us, action civics really has a central component of looking at causes of issues and working to make sustainable policy changes.
Sounds good. Liz?
Yeah, I would echo everything that Jill just said. Obviously, and I would just kind of add on, and I'm probably pretty sure that Jill would also agree with this, that another component is supporting teachers in doing this work. This is definitely not an avenue which most teachers have had any kind of work either as teachers or as pre-service teachers. Even poli-sci majors don't tend to have courses in civics, and there's a big difference between and civics, although certainly the two are definitely. So being able to support teachers in creating the safe spaces where that work can be done, in welcoming students in as equal stakeholders within, and building a classroom community that is democratic is also key in that work done. So it's a partnership of both of them.
So, Brad, I know that I was frozen out for a while, and then you were too. What we're doing is just talking about defining this thing, and I wanted to add that.
And Brad didn't get a chance to introduce himself.
Oh, right. Yeah, Brad.
Hey.
Looks like you're on a telephone now, right?
Yeah, I'm on my phone. My computer completely died.
Just one warning. It tends to sap the battery, so if you can have a plug nearby too, that's good. Oh, go ahead.
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Brad Latimer. I teach students Algebra 2 and Calculus at Science Leadership Academy, which is a public magnet school in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And I originally, essentially, when I was discussing with Steve in the components of his book, the thing that I was really interested in is a couple of other teachers at our school, and I really wanted to. We were doing one specific project focused with our Algebra 2 students, focused on data analysis and statistical analysis. But we really wanted to push students to take that next step to go beyond just analyzing the data and looking at the numbers and really designing an action plan and carrying something out to do with the information that they were creating. And so over the course of the past couple of years, some teachers at my school and I have worked to revamp the project and work with our students to get them involved in actually doing things and using what they were researching in the class and the questions that they were developing themselves that they were interested in to develop action plans and then do something in the school community, their local communities. And it's been a really, really cool process in developing it with students and then revamping it on an annual basis based on what we were learning.
Brad, you know, I always feel like stories help people to really grasp what you're talking about with something complex and conceptual. And I bet you have an example or two of student projects using algebra statistical analysis that they developed into action in the school or the community.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the components of the components of the project that I love is students are free to develop whatever inquiry question they want to focus on tied to social justice issues, and it's very, very broad. They can choose whatever they wanted to focus on. So we had a group focus on looking at SAT scores and ACT scores and how those align with racial data, with gender data, with socioeconomic status data. And then they started to look into why certain gaps in terms of how students were doing on those tests existed and what could be done to change those things. And one group actually put together a website that compiled several free resources online that were essentially free test prep resources. And so they built a functioning website which had all of these resources, and then they put together flyers advertising those resources, distributed them to community centers, churches, and schools in their neighborhoods, because they really want to make sure that what they were finding was that a lot of people didn't even know that there were a bunch of free resources out there that existed. So that was the goal that they chose to take for their particular project. That was one example. Another example is we had students look at the death penalty and differences in who was sentenced to the death penalty, who was executed for what crimes, racial makeup, gender makeup, and then they designed lesson plans to execute. So the students in my classes are juniors and sophomores, and so they designed lesson plans to execute with freshman advisories in the class. And to really, their goal was they wanted to educate younger students in the school and then challenge those younger students to educate people in their communities and their own families to really spread the word. And then what I've seen this year, because that was last year, is that now some 10th graders that I currently teach were 9th graders last year, and they chose to go in other directions with this particular project because they saw how powerful it was to actually design things to educate other people within the community. And so it's been a really cool project, just seeing what students come up with in terms of what they're passionate about and what they want to find, but then B, just seeing what they're able to do in terms of reaching out to their local community, the school community, and working together.
That's great.
Could we stay on that question a little bit about how do you get the students' questions and others? Like, how do you find out what kids' passions are, and how long does it take?
And then Elizabeth,
I mean,
Brad, I want to hear your
Everybody.
take, and Elizabeth
Everybody
has
should
some
jump
really good ideas for that too.
sure. I mean, I think it's just about giving students the room and the freedom in class to work together, to discuss with each other things that they're interested in. I usually do all kinds of intro, just data analysis activities where I'm a big fan of just giving kids a table of data and saying, come up with 3 statements based on this. And from that data, that kind of leads to, well, wait a second, I'm seeing that there's a link between gender and income. And then other students are like, well, I'm seeing that there's a link between race. And then, but just by having those conversations and encouraging students to work together and establishing a classroom environment that's comfortable and safe for students to have those conversations is really critical in terms of helping them develop those questions.
Elizabeth, that's great. Elizabeth, I know that you've had students really do survey work in what's going on in their communities. I think that's worth talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of what Brad is talking about, I'll echo in less math table-y type of experiences, but certainly I think gathering information in a way that that they're not used to. So they live in communities, they come in with lived experiences, and that's really important to make a part of the community that we have, and to those. So that certainly is part of it, that students often know what's going on in the neighborhood, in the school, a lot sooner, in a lot more depth than we know as adults in the building. So I think that that's a starting place. But in terms of the surrounding community, students generally in the places that I've taught and in a lot of the schools in the city are presented with a very deficit-based exposure and experience. So when their neighborhoods are represented in the media, they tend to be done so from a position of lacking or of danger or of deficit, and so certainly looking at those things that they're very well aware of and bringing that expertise is important, but it's also really important for students to understand and examine the assets that exist in their communities, the strength and the history and the culture that come from the communities that make them, functioning places where they are also welcomed and loved and cherished, with people and entities, both kind of brick and mortar and kind of cultural, that can and should be brought in any analysis of what's going well and in what areas does there need to be focus. So I think having those conversations and then giving students space to go out and really map and examine their community, whether that's within the school community or that's the surrounding geographic community, is key to starting those discussions. But in all of those places, youth expertise has to be the core of that.
Yeah.
You say map. They actually make maps? Sorry, Steve.
No,
we'll stop interrupting each other.
No, keep asking.
They absolutely, they do make maps. So we set kind of geographic boundaries, and a lot of the discussion, and I think Jill can also certainly speak to this, a lot of the discussion surrounds once we'd actually gone out on walking tours together as a class and done mapping, and a lot of the discussion is about what makes something a deficit or makes it an asset in the community, and perceptions, and also places that students recognize as positive spaces or spaces that are in need, that no one traveling through those spaces would recognize, that they know because they come and are a part of that community. So being able to, to recognize those places that as an adult, you as a visitor would not know, understand, or be able to recognize.
Just making a quick link, we had the Hear My World people on. I'd have to look up their name, but if you just look up #HearMyWorld, They were having kids put sounds from their neighborhoods onto maps. And then writing about the. Isn't that a fascinating idea?
Cool.
It's something that we don't think of often, but yeah, just to say. But Joe, go ahead.
What's the name of the group?
Hear my home.
Hear my home. Wow.
Yeah. If you just hashtag that, you'll find it. Yeah. Go ahead.
I just wanted to add on to what Liz was saying. So the asset mapping that we'll have students do usually comes after what is the most straightforward and basic activity that you can think of, which is asking students what they care about. But you'd be surprised at how little that question is asked to students in schools. Particularly, we work primarily with adolescents, and it's heartbreaking to hear how the results, our student feedback from students saying, wow, nobody's ever asked me what do I care about. Everybody always tells me in school what I'm supposed to care about. So we have a really simple public speaking process called Project Soapbox, and the idea is that students each have 2 minutes to get up on their soapbox and proclaim an issue that they care about, that they think is really important, and persuade their audience, to compel their audience to care about this issue as well. And that sort of sets off this process of thinking about and developing this inquiry around, well, what could we do around that issue once we've identified what we care about? And in terms of how long it takes, it doesn't take very long. It's a week or two. And Steve, I think you've seen some of these classrooms or speeches where students, middle school, high school students, talking about what they care about. It also, to Brad's point about creating a safe and nurturing space, it creates community to hear about all these diverse points of view and what's happening in their lives that extends the classroom into the community.
I wanted to mention a few other things. I mean, this can take time, but it's time that's really well worth it because students are learning and using research skills. They, of all kinds, they have to learn how to design interview questions and then do these interviews. I mean, there are a lot of skills that are involved. And it really goes beyond high school and middle school as well. One school that I focused on was 5th grade classrooms, and those teachers build up to this by having kids read the newspaper. And every week, like on Fridays, she brings in a pile of newspaper clippings and throws them on the floor, and the kids dive at them like fish in a feeding frenzy, and then they pass them around to each other, and they're writing notes in their notebooks. And she mixes national issues and local ones to really tune kids into what's going on around them. And the kids love that. They love that. And then it gets them really thinking about these things. And then those teachers ask the students then they all brainstorm and list the things they're interested in. They hear from each other. And finally, they have to write a proposal about what they're going to research. Now, she has them do them individually or in small groups rather than whole class. But the proposals are interesting as well because it's sort of similar to the soapbox, actually, but it's on paper. So these things take time. But, that brings up, in my mind, there are teachers who this might be really new to. I was reminded about this. I was talking to my friend Smokey Daniels on the phone just the other night, and he was saying that he finds in traveling around a lot of teachers are really scared to try these kinds of things. There are a lot of worries that they have. Are they going to lose control in the classroom? Will kids really have decent ideas? Will they get serious about their learning about this stuff? And I think also there can be a political side to this, and teachers might feel like, well, wait a minute, I'm not supposed to be getting political and teaching kids what to think. Is this going to get me in trouble? And so I'd like to hear how our panelists think about helping teachers overcome those obstacles in their mind. Yes.
Well, I think that, and it's in a component, it's echoing what everybody was saying, is that I think that a common misconception, and I hear this a lot as a math teacher, but this could be in any subject, is that in doing this sort of project-based work, you're stopping the learning in order to do the project, right? So I hear time as being a concern, and there's this kind of conception that so you teach the content and then you do the project, but when you're doing the project, the teaching of the content has stopped. And I would just say to teachers who want to get involved with this sort of work, that's not the case at all. And if you approach it with the perspective of that a well-designed project, through a well-designed project, students are actively learning. Not only they're not only learning how to apply the content that they've been focused on, but they're learning how to approach a subject, a topic that they're passionate about, and do something about that, and involve members. Exactly, or using any subject, but using collaborating with members of their class, their peers, members of their community. So they're learning. Well, I would argue they're learning well beyond just the skills of the course, and they're learning how to apply those skills in a meaningful way in a larger, broader sense, which I think should be at the root of what we're trying to do with students, is help them to make those connections between content and skills and how to use that information to impact the world around them.
Yeah, and I want to piggyback on that. I mean, I think there's so many things at play in the question that you asked, Steve. So some of it is the restrictions we put on ourselves as teachers. We can't. I remember the first time I taught in Illinois, I had to teach the Constitution test, and everyone said, "Oh, you have to use this little blue book, and it has to be 100 multiple choice questions," which none of that is true, actually, according to the law. It doesn't have to be any of that. But that was sort of the mythology that year after year, that's what the teacher before me did, and that's what the teacher before them did, so that's the way it has to be. And nobody ever questioned that. So some of it is teachers liberating themselves from the mythology of what we're supposed to be doing. It helps if you have an administrator that supports the work. Yeah. Won't lie. We work in schools right now that are standardized testing crazy, and I still see really, really innovative, cool stuff happening, but it helps if you have an administrator who kind of gets the difference between those things. And I think the same way we ask students to look at root causes of an issue, I would ask teachers to look at the real root causes of their anxiety and their concern. So is it, I'm worried I'm going to lose control of my class. Why am I so worried about that? Back to Brad's point, like, what have I done to create community and set foundations and norms in my classroom? I should be able to have students do project work without it being a total fear for me. So some of it is that kind of analysis. And then if it's a worry about this time, I have so much content to cover and whatnot, I mean, the standards really actually support this work now. Common Core, which is a focus on skills, you're going to see a lot of support for that. The C3 standards in social studies are inquiry to action, essentially. 21st century skills. I mean, a lot of, there's always going to be arguments against, and I think some of that comes from this, like, I don't know, we just did work this past year downstate across Illinois, and we got some initial assessment feedback back from evaluators, and the most common thing that teachers said was, you know, when I just took a chance, had faith in my students and just took that leap of faith, I was amazed at what they were able to do. And I see this over and over again, which is if you just give them the opportunity, almost always they will impress and empower, you know, just they're not going to let you down, but they just don't, students don't get that opportunity, and you just have to take that leap of faith.
You know, one of the things that I think is really interesting about the Mikva Challenge work is the Soapbox speeches, because they're like a mini version of the work, and so that allows teachers who might be hesitant and fearful to give it a little try, and then when they see students, you know, really grabbing onto that and taking it seriously and getting deeply into it, then they can begin to have confidence that it can move ahead. I think also on the political side, I would just say that I think most of us have really tried to emphasize that, look, we're not teaching these politics. We're not telling kids what to think. We are asking them what they think is important and asking them to then look into things like root causes so that they aren't just kind of doing it off the top of their head, but really thinking about, what do I believe, what's important to me, and why, and if there's a problem, where's it really coming from? So I think we have to help people understand that. I think you have more to say because you're working with teachers all the time now.
Well, I mean, I think that it's certainly, I don't think it's irrational for teachers to worry that, say, administrators who don't, as Jill said, kind of get the work coming into their rooms and saying that this is chaos and that students aren't learning. Because I think when students really have ownership over an action project, then the teacher shouldn't be at the front of the room. The teacher really shouldn't. I mean, the teacher becomes like a project manager, but it's the students that are doing the work. It's the students that are setting goals. It's the students that are assessing how they're progressing to those goals. It's the students that are reflecting and constructing next steps. And there's a dialogue certainly that's going on between different groups and between students and groups, but it is really a very kind of organic process and one in which there's a real partnership and respect between the teachers and the students and the work that they're doing. That being said, I think that requires, like I said earlier, I think it requires a lot of teacher support. I don't remember the students as partners in the classroom class when I was a pre-service teacher, and I'm pretty sure they haven't added that since then. So I think that structure of work is not something that teachers are still very much classically trained in the model of you are at the front of the classroom and you guide and you are the fount of knowledge from which the students fill their cup. And so doing and creating other structures is a real challenge and is not something that teachers feel comfortable with. Most teachers will not stand in front of their students with something that they don't themselves feel comfortable with. And so asking them to do otherwise is somewhat disingenuous without a real support. That being said, I do think that teachers also need to understand that, and I will say I can only speak for Illinois, but when you look at Charlotte Danielson, very much, which is the kind of mother of the evaluation system that we use in Illinois, that the basis of that, the heart of that is, how do students show their independence and control of their learning? How do they show the relationship between the teacher and each other? And all those things are rooted in a democratic and civic classroom. And then lastly, just to kind of echo something that Jill said, I do think that there really does need to be a period of reflection. If you're worried about losing control of your classroom or what students are going to do if you give them freedom, I think that there are some real essential questions that you need to be asking yourself about how you view your students and what are the maybe unconscious ideas that you're bringing into your classroom in view of your students, and what it is that you might be thinking of them that you're not cognizant of that is shaping the decisions that you make in front of your kids. If you know what best practice is, and you know that student construction of knowledge is best practice, and that inquiry is best practice, then why is it that you are reticent to reach out and get the supports that are there, or ask questions, or try to form networks of other educators, which I think is really crucial.
That can help. Yeah, I wanted to add. I learned a lot about this. I kind of got started on this really going to Elizabeth's classroom, and I learned some things about myself doing that too. And just a quick story. There was a point where the students were trying to decide. In the class I was observing, they were trying to decide the issue, and there was some disagreement about that. And so Elizabeth, I began to realize, had taught them a number of strategies for how to deliberate together on a topic and try to settle this. And so she said, okay, how should we decide on this? And so she threw it back to the students. She didn't say, we're going to do this or we're going to do that. But she had taught a number of strategies, including one that a lot of teachers know called Four Corners. And she said, what should we use? And they knew these strategies because she had directly taught them. It wasn't just throwing everything open to say, kids, whatever you want to do. And so she said, how do you want to do that? They said 4 corners. So she said, okay, get in the corners and, talk over your issues and then appoint somebody to report back. They did that, and it turned into just another debate, and it wasn't getting anywhere. So she didn't settle it or tell them what to do. She just reflected back to them. She said, you guys are just going back and forth. How are we going to settle this? Because it's just a debate. What else can we do? And she threw it back on them to figure out how to get that working. And it took a couple of tries before they finally found a way to begin to talk to each other and listen to each other and come to some agreement that sort of combined both points of view. And I just really began to appreciate how it was this combination of teaching skills, teaching knowledge, but then stepping back and handing once they had the tools, handing the decision-making back to them. There were other times, too, when I was observing when, like, kids in a small group were struggling with something, and I knew how they could solve their problem. And I'm about to say something, and Elizabeth's standing next to me, and I thought, I better keep my mouth shut. And I did. And then I asked her afterwards, I said, I wanted to help them because they were stuck. But I guess I thought I better not because I'm just the visitor anyway. And she said, do you remember this, Elizabeth? Elizabeth said to me, you know what? If I do it for them, they'll never learn how to do it themselves. And it was like, yes. But I realized it was so hard for me not to step in and help. I really had to hold myself back. But when I interviewed the kids later, I took a group of them to the library. They said, this is hard. She makes us make all these decisions. But then they turned around and said, we really like this. This is what we want to do. It was very cool.
So I had a quick story. Also, sorry. Coming back. Anyway, I'm getting feedback. No, we're good. We're good now. So, just to push back a little bit and to try to think about that question of why teachers might be a little reticent to do this kind of work, putting students in the center. One of the best experiences I've had with young people in the last few years was a project where we did an investigation of tree swallows. These are kids in the South Bronx, right? And we built nest boxes, took them out and put them up in the city park. Learned about all sorts of environmental stuff. Learned about birds. Started going out on walks to look at the birds. But it really did not come from their questions, right? And if I had waited for their questions, let's just say it took a lot of planning with the community organization Rocking the Boat, who we were working with, right? So I just trying to think about that positively, like what might hold teachers back. I think sometimes you want to actually have an in-depth, really well-crafted project, right? And you worry that if you just are planning it on the fly around their questions, you won't get there. Is that a fair?
You guys better, you better be able to answer that one.
Well, I mean, I don't think that you walk in day one and say, all right, kids, what is it that you're interested in? Let's go. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, I think that's untenable. No teacher is going to walk in and say to their principal, like, no, I don't have lesson plans. We're just going to, talk it out and see what the students want to do. I think the point is that this is not what we're talking about, obviously. I mean, Brad teaches math, by the way. I think that's amazing that this is in math, because I got to say that's the one area I've always really personally struggled with, but certainly always trying to imagine that. So I think that that's really amazing. But this needs to be embedded everywhere. These practices need to be everywhere, and content, no matter what it is, needs to be made relevant. So, you know, maybe the project that you're doing with your students is still in their community. It's still reflecting the world that they live in and that they're a part of, and is very, you know, real to them. And so that interaction is part and parcel of the whole picture that we're talking about, and is building the kind of skills that that they need to be able to implement anyway. So,
Elizabeth, one of the things that in reading Steve's book that I saw you were working with is housing patterns, right? That's something that you seem to introduce at different times. Gentrification housing patterns, is that right? Or
No, my students did not work on I mean, they worked on lots of things. As Jill will tell you, they worked on peer pressure for many, many years. But we did not do housing.
Oh, I thought I saw that mentioned.
Yep.
Okay.
I mean, I do know some teachers that
So
have.
the point is, like, how can you have enough? So let me ask it more simply. How can you have enough resources for kids to be able to do the in-depth work you want them to do if you're starting with their questions? I think that's what teachers might ask.
Well, I mean, and then I will certainly. Jill looks like she's got some adding in to do there. The whole purpose of doing this is because it comes from the belief that students are now and continue to be active members of our community. So the question is, how do we give them space in order to do the work now, so they can start doing the work now and continue to do this as they leave our space? Can they leave the building that I work in already with experiences and knowledge and skills under their belt, and then continue to do this work in whatever spaces and in all the spaces that they work in? So the question really is, are there no resources that exist? Are there no NGOs that exist? Are there no CBOs that exist? Are there no experts in their field? Are there no adult allies and advocates? Are there no youth that they can draw on? Because that is the resources, and those things do exist, and that's exactly what they have to learn how to access.
Yes.
So who are the people and the people who have power and in charge, and how do they, you know, deal with, interact, and get the things that they want from those sources, and then how do they rebound from those failures and continue and have the stamina to continue to work on that? So those are kind of the lived-in experiences that they bring in, that we, you know, work with and then continue to expand upon. So I do think that a lot of teachers get nervous about, like, well, how do I provide everything that they'll need in order to be able to do the work?
You don't.
That can't be the model, and I think that's why it's also scary, because it requires teachers to sometimes have a depth of knowledge that they don't have, and so they're unwilling to do it, or a vulnerability and a willingness to share that vulnerability, like, this is a path that we're going on together, and we're going to try to figure out how to do it.
So let me, I mean, when I was watching this first project of Elizabeth's, I mean, I was blown away by kind of the way it unfolded, which was unpredictable. The students, after doing some research at the beginning, had focused in on the issue of court waivers that meant that adolescents who were on trial for serious offenses were automatically referred in Illinois to adult courts. Elizabeth, how did they find out about that? Because that was the issue they settled on. And but they must have done some research to even find out that that was an issue. So I was not there at that point. They had already done that research. So, but they had found that out, and I'll tell you my part of it, and then she can add in the missing pieces that I didn't see. So then they discovered, and this was them poking around somehow, I don't know how much Elizabeth helped or didn't, that there was a bill within the state legislature in Illinois to change that. and they learned that the bill was sitting in the Rules Committee. So one day when I walked in, they were on the phone with the assistant to, what was her name? The legislator who was head of the Rules Committee, to try to find out what should we do, what kind of lobbying can we do to get this thing out of the Rules Committee. And, you know, I'm sure that in the textbooks, or maybe none of us might have thought right away that kids needed to learn about rules committees in legislatures. And actually, it failed, because what they found out was the session was coming to an end in the next week, and anything that didn't get out of the Rules Committee was going to die. And so it did. But Elizabeth, I think you then invited in the head of an organization, a community organization that was campaigning on that issue, and she spoke to the kids and got the kids excited about raising money to continue the fight. And I found out, you know, over a year later, what is it, a year and a half, 2 years later, that in January I'm reading in the Chicago Tribune the list of bills that had been passed by the legislature, and that bill finally actually passed. I don't know if they even found out about that part, but Elizabeth, there must have been parts they did to get those supports and find out those pieces, but perhaps there's some things you did as well. So again, in my mind, it's sort of, when does the teacher help, and when do you let the kids struggle with it and find out the resources? Do you remember how that unfolded?
I mean, and I'm sure that Brad could probably also speak to how he is really, really interested in that math aspect. Can I just say that one more time?
We'll get in here.
Basically it came from larger issues of like gang violence and youth experiences, and looking at root causes that Jill mentioned earlier, and really kind of analyzing what are some of the issues there, and then from there they looked at, well, what happens to people who are accused of committing certain classes of felonies as you know, as minors, and so that's where they came to the automatic waiver. And you know, once they decided on the automatic waiver, then in their research they found that there was a bill that was being floated, and then from there was just a lot of questioning. So, you know, well, how do we, so me saying like, well, how do we know where the bill is? And so then they were like, well, it's in committee. What does that mean? Well, I don't know. What does that mean? Let's go back and think about how bills become a law so we can figure out where it's going and who we have to talk to. So then they were all researching and trying to find out how a bill becomes a law. And so, okay, it means this, and it's in this committee. Okay, who's doing that? And so
they had to look on the web to see who are the
people. Yeah, it's very much about asking questions and supporting where needed. You don't just hang students out to dry like, well, yes, you couldn't figure it out, it's too bad for you. But it really is about respecting the intellect and capacity of the students to do the work and find the questions, and to understand that these things exist outside of them, so that they can continue to search and find those things.
I don't know what's wrong with teachers saying, I don't know, let's look it up. Let's go look into this together. There's so many things I don't know. And to act like I am the place of all knowledge is just, it's setting the wrong impression of like that the teacher imparts knowledge to the student. It's an investigation, and I maybe can ask, maybe, oh, you're having trouble searching and finding that? Let's try searching it this way. I've been around the block a few times, so I can help you and I can guide you, but I don't have to know everything. My students pick topics so wide-ranging every semester. I was not an expert, but it was amazing because I got to learn about this topic with them and through their lens. I could do the research myself, but I'm going to come to very different conclusions than students, than young people in my classroom. So it was a real dialogue, and I think that explaining that dialogue is one way that we learn, and for teachers, learning is messy, right? Learning is not, when it's clean and clear, You know, that works for something, that doesn't work for everything. I think it's important to just accept the fact that learning is sometimes a little bit messy.
Brad, it sounds
Yeah.
like you work on this by sort of planting seeds with charts of data that have implicit questions in them, and then the students begin to wonder because they're looking at these numbers and trying to figure out what the hell they mean. Am I right? That's what I heard you saying earlier.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I mean, just would say from a math perspective and as a math teacher, honestly, I believe that the least interesting things that I teach when I'm teaching data analysis are how to find the mean, median, and mode, and how to, you know, analyze a set of data and determine if something is statistically significant. The interesting stuff is what about this, or, you know, in looking at with one group food deserts and access to organic foods, and, you know, and they're like, well, how many organic food sources are there in this zip code? I don't know. Let's find that out together. That's when it gets really, really. I mean, and when this can start running with it is just what's really, really cool for me to see as a teacher, and to just, you know, just really echoing that sentiment of, you know, I am the expert on the math content. Yes, I know more nitty-gritty math calculations than my students do, but that's not what my emphasis is. That's not what my passion is in teaching mathematics. I want to teach my students how to use that. And that's what is really, really fascinating. And when we're doing these sorts of projects, I don't know the answer to most of their questions, but it's about helping them develop the questions that they need to. And then also, when they see me embracing the fact that I don't know something and searching for the answer with them, that really establishes the tone in the classroom that that's what we're looking to do, that we're looking to use our collective wisdom and the resources at our collective disposal to try to answer big, challenging questions, because in the world, machines can't by doing one. It's complicated. You have to find ways to use whatever resources we have in working together to answer them.
I wanted to emphasize here that part of what drives me on this, and I think drives teachers who get into it, is even if it's challenging and even if it doesn't cover everything that is the teacher's own favorite project or perfectly worked up project, is some of the things that this work accomplishes. And I really tried to think about that and learn about that as I was working on the book. And I ended up with a list of things. I mean, I think to me, one of the really important things is focus on community. I was never a big fan of the Republican columnist in the New York Times, of David. Oh, why is my phone ringing? Oh, Lord. Well, I'm going to ignore it. David, who is the Republican? I thought I unplugged it, but it's...
David Brooks.
David Brooks. But if you've looked at his columns the past couple of weeks, he's been talking about the lack of community in this country, and how that is really leading to people's cynicism and willing to vote for somebody who is essentially an authoritarian. And what I feel like, I'm really sorry, I thought I had unplugged everything.
We don't hear it as much as you do.
Oh, good. Okay. Anyway, you know, this really helps students to become active citizens in their community. And to me, in this country, that is such a crying need that we have to do everything we can. And school is one of the few places where we can work on that. There's no place else, really, that people can learn how to do this stuff. And so we're giving students skills to do this. We're giving them the sense that they can actually do it. And so it really gives them a sense of agency that I see changes them as people. They see themselves in a different light. They see education a different way. They become committed to learning. I'll never forget in the book by Brian Schultz, called Spectacular Things Happen Along the Way. This researcher from Harvard, Celia Euler, comes to visit. She leans down and asks this fifth grader, how do you feel about doing projects like this in school? And the kid looked at her and said, this ain't school, this is important. And so I feel that that really tells us why we're doing this. And then another of the things on my list is that it's energizing for teachers. It really helps a teacher feel like exciting things are happening before his or her eyes. And so to me, these reasons for doing this can drive us to try it even if we're scared. So I wanted to get that in before we're done.
That's great. Thank you for that. No. Can I ask people to reflect before we leave here a little bit on, Letters to the Next President is a project of the National Writing Project, etc.
Yeah, and you or I were on the phone call about that together.
Yeah, we were. Yeah. But so, and there could be great things there, and so, but more generally, how does any of this work relate to the electoral issues that are going around?
Oh, Jill.
So, I mean,
we has a lot to say about that.
We do direct campaign work. We have students out working on campaigns, which the question about how do you keep it not political, that's longer than we have time for. But but we do link, like this year, our Soapbox will be linked to the elections, which are what are the issues that the candidates running for office need to know about your community in order to govern the entire country, right? So it's just basically, in some ways, and actually we're going to have Project Soapbox on the Writing Project site. In some ways, it's raising awareness. It's having young people have a place to say, this is what we care about. We actually matter. We have opinions. We know you think we're all apathetic. We're not. We're just uninvited. And so this is inviting them into the conversation. And then, for us, that soapbox idea of what do you care about is the lens to then use to take any kind of action, electoral action, action in your community. It's tapping into sort of the most primal needs that young people are facing: safety, security, food, shelter, and being able to share this with the public who does not hear what's going on for so many of our young people. They're stereotyped, the images are always negative. And so it's just providing, it's connecting that to the elections.
Yeah, I heard Noam Chomsky recently say, elections are they're not unimportant, but there are other things that are important, right? Yeah. Elections matter is what he said, but there are things that are important.
Yeah, right? It's not an end. It's a point on a continuum. If that's all you do, you're not doing enough. But if you say, well, it doesn't matter, so I'm not getting involved, well, then you're letting other people make decisions for you.
Yeah. See, when the letters, my one critique of the letters to the president is in the mikvah challenge curriculum, and I also included this, one of the things it asks students to do is to do power analysis. Okay, if you want to change, who do you got to talk to? The president might be totally the wrong person. It may be an alderman here in Chicago, which kids in one project did, and they learned a tremendous amount from that alderman. So I think it's important in these letters to analyze, okay, if this is my issue, who really needs to hear about it beside the president if I actually want to see something happen rather than just throw my voice out into the void?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would.
Well, and I'll add, sorry, Liz, is that people say, oh, elections happen every 4 years. They actually pretty much happen every year. In some places, more than one election. So, and local politics is everything. So people start paying here, but actually, for us in Chicago, the mayoral election is going to be the election to watch. So, it doesn't have to be a once every 4 year thing.
When does that happen?
Or the election to the attorney, to the state's attorney was a big one in Chicago, a major one.
Yeah, I was just going to add that, I think it's important to recognize the role that youth already has played, the large expansion of youth voice in this presidential election, as well as in local elections, in the primaries, like Steve mentioned, with the Illinois State's attorney and the Buy Anita campaign. But I also think it's really important that that the focus not necessarily be on that, but be on youth grassroots efforts. Like if you look at Chicago Public Schools over the past year, we have had tremendous amounts of student activism in every branch that you can imagine, from like walking outs to sit-ins to petitions to online campaigns to marches downtown. I mean, we have had an explosion of independently organized youth activism, and I think that it's important not to kind of move that lens, like if somehow if students aren't actively involved in the campaigns, that they're not doing important work on a community level that is guaranteed to have a much bigger impact.
Mm-hmm. And I was actually thinking the exact same thing, and we're seeing there are a lot of similar things going on in Philadelphia to Chicago. And the other component that I think has been really powerful that I've seen is not only the independent student organization and the work that they're doing, but then through social media, through different online sources, just the way that students are also self-publishing, working together to actually spread the word, and actually seeing the impact that that's having within my school, but then also in the school district of Philadelphia as it is, and then seeing, we have journalism clubs popping up in our school and in other schools. Students are
we froze him.
taking it to the next step of not just posting things on Facebook or Twitter, but then also write-ups of it and to do more.
Yeah, we need a whole nother show about how online activism is connected to in-the-street activism. Yeah, absolutely.
Meanwhile, I just want to say,
we should finish.
Listen. Well, I'm going to do the plug. If
Good,
you're struggling
please.
with this and want a little help, I mean, that's why I wrote From Inquiry to Action, and I really tried to include stories
Lots
from
of great
classrooms like Brad's and Elizabeth's, because those were the things I saw where it was really happening, to my amazement often, and so I'm hoping that can inspire people. And it's from Heinemann.
Works really well on my phone, by the way. So
okay.
just to say. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
So
that's where I'm reading it. So.
Yeah, but thanks, guys. I just want to say you and your students have been this tremendous inspiration for me at a time when it just seems like politics and community and people's willingness to support things like education are just coming apart in this country. And but then I see the work that that it's happening by you and the kids, not just the teachers. It gives me a lot of hope.
Well, thank you all. I couldn't believe how fast we got up to. It's already past 10 o'clock here on the East Coast. But thank you all. We're here every Wednesday, and we try to address some of these issues, and we're going to come back to this in different ways. We're part of the EdTech Talk channel of the World Bridges Network that Dave Cormier and Jeff Lieblow set up, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you all. Get Steve's book. Read it.
And thanks, you guys. Thanks for being on this with us.
Thank you.
I guess we say goodbye.
See you.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thanks, Paul.